Hey, Steve Saretsky here. As always, if you're not subscribed to the channel, hit subscribe, give it a thumbs up, comment below. Love to hear your feedback. Helps me with YouTube, obviously, as well. Basically, coming to you today, Friday, I'm actually considering, if you can give me some feedback on this if you'd like, I'm looking at doing basically a weekly show, and I'm going to try to keep it to, I wanted to keep it to a set specific date, and I think I'm going to make that every Friday. I'm going to come to you with sort of a market recap, all my findings for the week, things that I find interesting, things that can impact Vancouver real estate. This is essentially the video format. If you're not already on my weekly newsletter that comes out every Monday morning, got a couple thousand people on there right now. That seems to be probably one of the most popular things that I put out. It's essentially a recap of my findings for the week, and most of it pertains to Vancouver real estate. So like if you want to know exactly what's happening in the market, things that might impact prices, this and that, or new policies coming out, etc. That's basically your inside track. I'll also occasionally talk about, Toronto, Canadian real estate, or other markets that I just find interesting. So I'm going to put something here in the comments below where you can go sign up for that newsletter. But with that newsletter aside, this is essentially the video format where I'm thinking about basically coming out every Friday and essentially recapping the market, giving you stories, things that I find interesting, data, that sort of thing. So if that's something that you think I should stick with, like a weekly schedule, because essentially right now it's like, okay, I'm trying to put out sort of one a week, but it's based on what I find interesting on one certain topic. So maybe that's like the stat for the month or whatever. But I'm thinking of maybe just sort of rambling on and touching on a few different points, things that I find interesting. So maybe your feedback on that. But basically just going to jump into it here. Obviously, I want to talk first off on the recent stuff this week that was put out, I think, by the BC government. Basically just talking about the massive surplus they've had this year. I've talked about this, but basically the BC economies, it is ultimately an addiction to real estate. I believe it makes up now 25% of GDP. So obviously that's just massively substantial. You look at the construction, all the trades. You have in the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver, we have now just past 14,000 realtors. That is obviously a new record. I'm just watching that number grow every day. Obviously I have friends and people reaching out to me on probably once a month asking how to get their license. So that's just something that's when you've put so much emphasis on real estate, and I've talked about how governments just love this. It's almost like a drug, and they've just become addicted to it, and so they have to sort of keep it going. That's what I'm talking about. Everyone's getting all bent out of shape with the NDP not intervening, but basically, transfer tax revenue is up 32% year over year. Transfer tax revenue up 32% year over year. So that's your property transfer tax as well as like the foreign buyers tax in there, which was a total increase of 493 million extra revenue dollars for the BC government. So you can just imagine if you have even a pullback of that, you get back to more normal levels. That's $500 million right there in revenue essentially. So. This is why, from a political aspect, as much as governments will talk about housing affordability and intervening and bringing in all these policies, there's always some sort of backhanded things that they're trying to bring in. Again, that's what you saw with the foreign buyers tax. You implement it, but you create sort of a couple loopholes, and then the market starts to slow down. So you bring in a first-time buyer's grant, and just to, keep it going. So you can always see, try to stay one step ahead of these guys. And then to that point, the next thing I want to talk on is, if you didn't see it, if you're a renter, things aren't going to get any better for you. They just approved the 2018 rental increases to 4%. So essentially every year there's a formula that I believe the Residential Tenancy Act uses, which is ultimately overseen by the BC government. It's you're allowed to increase it based on inflation plus 2%. So I believe last year you're allowed to increase it by 3.7%. Your landlord once a year can increase up to that amount. They can increase it by 2% on top of whatever the inflation is for the year. So the BC government, that was just approved this week, is increasing it to 4%. So that means technically, if you're in your place for a full year, let's say your tenancy's coming up for renewal in March 2018, the landlord can then increase it by 4% in 2018. Your monthly payments can increase by 4%. So I mean, it's obviously in the middle of a housing crisis. It certainly doesn't make affordability any easier. Just to put salt in the wounds, is this was the largest increase for allowing landlords to increase. It was the largest increase since 2012, and it was the second largest increase in the past 10 years. Which is interesting because, the Bank of Canada, there's so much contradiction going on where they're saying, oh, we don't have enough inflation, we can't hike interest rates. Obviously you can see them starting to creep up now. They're talking about it again in October. But there's not enough inflation. We don't have inflation, we can't raise. But all the inflation is going into financial assets, whether it's the stock market or into real estate again. One bedroom rents, the data this is from PadMapper. I know Tom Davidoff, who I've worked with closely, has looked at it, and we're finding similar numbers. But one bedroom rents in the city of Vancouver are up 13% year over year. So you can't tell me there's no inflation, right? So anyways, they're going to, rents have jumped up about 13% for one bedrooms. I think they only had two bedrooms up about 3%, which I think is wrong. It's up much more than that. But most of the movement has been in the one bedroom level. So, not only you're going to have a rent increased by 13% year over year, but you're now allowing landlords to increase that by another 4% if people are already on existing tenancies. And this is one of the reasons why, I'm seeing a further, people ask me, well, who's buying right now? I would say that it's mostly first-time buyers, and it's a lot of local investors. And I think people are essentially, right or wrong, you can agree with it or disagree with it. It's to me, it doesn't matter. Like, everybody makes their own decisions. People are justifying buying in at inflated costs. Because they're like, I'm tired of renting, I feel like it's throwing money away, and like my rents keep going up and up and up, and you can't blame them. Obviously, rents are up 13% year over year for one bedrooms, and you're allowing landlords to increase it every year. There's that uncertainty, right? So and this is not me like predicating for home ownership, buy. It's whatever you're comfortable with, but this is the mentality that's out there. Obviously can't blame them, because I don't think people are really getting a whole lot of breaks at the rental space right now either. I mean, this is like a housing crisis. I mean, it's things have gotten way out of people's incomes again. Whether you're buying, obviously those are crazy prices, but then if you're renting as well, I mean, the rents are their highest in Canada. So that's what we're seeing. And then it's basically just like it's a push for affordability. So you have, I just released a blog post this week. It's essentially like it highlighted the composition shift in the Vancouver real estate market. Basically, you can see where the detached has peaked out. You've had foreign money pull back. So you're seeing a lot of slack in the detached market, but you're seeing a composition shift. So basically what it is the total number of sales. So back in, just to give you an example, so back in January 2016 was basically, you could argue was sort of the peak of the detached market. I would say maybe some areas it came around sort of March, April, but for the most part it was like really, really active in, January 2016, and it started to slowly, you might have hit peak prices in March or April 2016, but for the most part, like, I would say almost like peak insanity seemed to sort of be in January 2016 Dean, that is exactly what aligns with the peak of the overall sales mix. So what that means is how many detached homes, of all the sales that are happening in Vancouver, how many of those sales are of detached homes and how many of them are condos and how many of them are townhouses. In January 2016, the total number of detached homes that made up of the sales was 35%. So basically 35% of all the sales in Vancouver were of detached homes. That has since dropped. So it's been steadily declining over really the last year. It's now down to 23%. So you went from 35% to 23%. So people are basically shifting away. The sales that are happening are shifting away from the detached market because, you know, the fact of the matter is the majority of locals can't afford a detached home, you know, whether it's in Vancouver or surrounding areas. And so they're all moving into condos. You know, you're seeing a lot of demand for 3-bedroom condos, 3-bedroom townhouses, which are very rare in Vancouver. You know, those are all crazy multiple offers right now, but everyone's shifting in there. So you've had that shift away from the detached market, and then you've had condos for the same time period went from 59% of the sales mix in January 2016, 59 to 68%. So there's less and less detached sales happening of total sales, and you have more and more condo sales happening. And so this is just really a tale of the market, right? So what I'm telling you is when I see more and more first timers, when I see a shift away from the detached market, when you see foreign buyers pulling back, obviously you can see the high-end luxury sales, whether that's in West Van or the west side of Vancouver. You know, those expensive luxury homes they're just sitting. You know, the months of inventory is steadily growing, and this is just the trend, right? You have more local buyers. You can say it's a foreign buyer's tax. You can say it was foreign capital flows. You can say the market tiring. We might never know. There might never be one conclusion, but what I can tell you is this is what I'm seeing in the market, and the data certainly seems to sort of back that up. And that's really all I got. That's sort of the recap for the week. So if you like these videos, and do that, and just one sort of tidbit before I let you go here. Always things that I find interesting to give you some feet on the ground perspective. Doing a lower entry sort of condo out in Surrey. And you know, it was someone wasn't putting down 20%, so they needed to get the mortgage insured. And so there's 3 mortgage insurers. It's CMHC, Genworth, and oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. But anyways, there's the 3 insurers that will they have to insure any mortgage that's under 20%. It's a high ratio. It has to be insured. So this is my buyer. So he submitted the paperwork, for the condo for financing, and 2 of these insurers said no, we're not going to insure it. It's an older building. We just don't have an appetite for it. Is essentially what they said. So we sort of submitted it to that last insurer, and it was interesting because it sort of got approved. They went to the docs, and they did a verbal appraisal. Now, I've never heard of a verbal appraisal, so I had to ask my mortgage broker. I said, "Well, what's a verbal appraisal?" And essentially, he just said, they just called and they said, okay, so I'm gonna explain this quickly. So what happened was, what they do for an appraisal is they call the listing agent and they set up, an appraisal time to come through the building to look at it, and make sure that it meets market value. So if it appraises, so if you buy the condo for $200,000 and they say we think it's worth $200,000, okay, good. They say to the lender, yeah, we're good to go, and the mortgage gets approved. So yeah, normally the standard procedures is these people come through, They call a listing agent, they get them through, they come through, they literally take, 2-3 pictures on their iPhone, and they just submit it. And I've personally never had an issue getting anything approved, or basically approved. But they usually at least come through. I've had some crazy stories where they just said, "Hey, okay, what's the address? I'm gonna drive by the building," and they don't even go and look. They just drive on by it and just rubber stamp the deal. So they're not. I don't know. Like these appraisals to me seem like a formality. I don't know if they're doing their homework. Like to me it seems a little bit crazy. But anyways, they did what was called a verbal appraisal. Again, I've never heard of this. My mortgage broker had actually never heard of it. This is coming from a listing agent. She says, yeah, they just called me and they did a verbal appraisal. Well, what's a verbal appraisal? She goes, they just called me. They called me and asked what the offer price was. And I told them what it was. And they said, okay, good to go. So, I don't know if I'd call it an appraisal. They basically just asked what the offer price was. Maybe they can do their homework by looking up the MLS. I don't know. But anyways, to me, that was sort of just raised a red flag. Some of these companies might not be doing their homework. Obviously, you worry because these are higher ratio mortgages that are going in, particularly on an older building. Nonetheless, happy that I got that financing through and approved. But that's what's going on. So obviously can't speak on all of these. I'm sure it's not happening that frequently, but obviously it is happening. So that's all I got. If you like this video, if you like the idea of the weekly Friday sort of recaps, let me know in the comments below, and talk to you soon.